Imagine being 15 years old, a straight-A student, a basketball player, a girl with everything ahead of her, and then, in a single spring afternoon, vanishing without a trace. No warning, no goodbye, just a note on a table and an empty bedroom. Now imagine that the only thing that would eventually bring you back into the light was a television show watched by millions of strangers. This is the story of Missy Munday, and once you hear it, you won't forget it. In the quiet town of Hancock, Maryland, life moved at the kind of pace that made you believe the world was still safe. Missy Munday fit perfectly into that world. At just 15 years old, she was the kind of student every teacher remembered, consistently ranking in the top 10% of her class at Hancock High School, active in the Future Homemakers of America, and a dedicated member of the school basketball team. She wasn't just book smart. She was driven, purposeful, the kind of girl who made her family proud without even trying. Her future looked bright. Her path seemed clear. But as we all know, life has a way of redirecting even the most promising stories, sometimes gently, and sometimes with devastating force. In the spring of 1986, a man named Jerry Strickland arrived in Hancock. He was charming, polished, the kind of man who could talk his way into and out of almost anything. He told people he wanted to build an orphanage. He spoke with confidence and warmth, the kind that makes people lower their guard before they even realize they've done it. He approached Missy's family about buying or renting property, but very quickly, his interest shifted, away from real estate and toward their 15-year-old daughter. Missy's mother saw through him almost immediately. She recognized the smoothness for what it was: performance, manipulation, a mask. But Missy? Missy was 15, and Jerry Strickland made her feel seen in a way that felt intoxicating to a teenage girl still figuring out who she was. And that right there, is where the danger truly began. Because predators don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with warning signs pinned to their chest. They arrive with compliments and patience, and the unsettling ability to make a young girl feel like the most important person in the room. Jerry Strickland was that kind of man. And Missy Munday never stood a chance. On an ordinary morning in April 1986, Missy Munday left for school just like any other day. She carried her bag. She walked out the door. She may have even said goodbye. But she never came home. In her place was a note, the kind of note that every parent dreads finding. It said she had left voluntarily, that she was choosing this. At the same time, Jerry Strickland disappeared from Hancock without a trace. For Missy's family, the days that followed must have been absolutely unbearable. Not knowing if she was safe, not knowing if she was being manipulated or hurt or scared somewhere far from home. Not knowing if the daughter they had raised, the honor student they had cheered for, the girl with the bright future, was even alive. Police classified her as a runaway and searched as best they could, but the trail went cold almost immediately. For nearly a year, Missy's family lived in that agonizing in-between. Too afraid to grieve, too helpless to celebrate. Just waiting, just hoping. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Michigan, Missy Munday, now 16 years old, was quietly building a new life she never should have had to live. Near Pontiac, Michigan, Missy had taken a job as an assistant manager at a Union 76 gas station. Think about that for a moment. A 16-year-old girl, far from home, far from her family, working a job that most adults would find exhausting, all while living under a false sense of normalcy constructed by a manipulative man more than 10 years her senior. She and Strickland kept a low profile. No drama, no attention. Just two people trying to disappear into the ordinary rhythm of everyday life. And for a while, it worked. But something was coming. Something that would shatter whatever fragile peace they had built and drag the darkest version of their story into the open. On the morning of May 11th, 1987, a man named Elmer DeBoer arrived at the Union 76 gas station just as he did every week. Elmer was a courier, a working man, the kind of man who showed up on time, did his job with quiet reliability, and asked for nothing more than to go home safely at the end of the day. That morning, he was there to collect the cash receipts, $10,000 in total. He never made it back to his car. Hours later, his vehicle was found abandoned in the parking lot. The next day, Elmer DeBoer's body was discovered, with 2 bullet holes in the back of his head. An innocent man, gone for $10,000. Police would later come to believe that Jerry Strickland had used Missy, used her like a tool to lure DeBoer away from his vehicle. While Missy distracted him, Strickland robbed and shot him in cold blood. Afterward, the two used the stolen cash to buy a car and vanished. Again. Elmer DeBoer had a life. He had people who loved him. And because of one man's greed and one man's cruelty, he never came home. Let that sit for a moment. What had begun as a search for a missing teenager had now become a nationwide manhunt for a suspected killer. Detectives had names. They had faces. But Missy and Strickland had seemingly evaporated, absorbed into the vast, quiet expanse of America, living under the radar in a country big enough to disappear in. Then came February 1988. The producers of Unsolved Mysteries, one of the most watched television programs in America, had taken an interest in the case. In a single broadcast, they laid out the entire story: the missing girl, the charming manipulator, the murdered courier, the stolen money, the fugitives still on the run. And then they showed their faces to millions. The response was almost instantaneous. In Moses Lake, Washington, a quiet community far from both Maryland and Michigan, the phones at the local police department began to ring off the hook. The couple from the show? They had been living right there in Moses Lake. He was working at Kmart. She was working at a card shop. Living ordinary lives, shopping at ordinary stores, hiding in the most ordinary way possible. But there is something about human beings that the guilty always underestimate. We notice things. We remember faces. And when millions of people see a face on television, someone always recognizes it. When officers arrived at the couple's modest rental home in Moses Lake, they braced for confrontation. What they found instead stopped them in their tracks. Missy and Strickland were already waiting for them. They had watched the episode of Unsolved Mysteries, too. They had sat in their living room and watched their own faces broadcast to the entire nation. And in that moment, whatever hope they had of continuing their invisible life simply collapsed. It was over. And they knew it. What followed was a legal process that forced everyone to grapple with a deeply uncomfortable question. How responsible was Missy Munday, a girl who had been groomed, manipulated, and controlled since the age of 15 for the crimes committed under the shadow of Jerry Strickland? Missy made the decision to cooperate with prosecutors. She agreed to testify against the man who had taken so much from her: her adolescence, her innocence, her freedom, and very nearly her entire future. On the witness stand, she told the court that she had known about the robbery, but not the murder. She testified that afterward, Strickland had pulled her aside and told her, "In case anything should ever happen, I think you ought to know that I did it." The jury believed her. Jerry Strickland was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus an additional life term for kidnapping. He disappeared into the Michigan prison system, where he remains to this day. For Elmer DeBoer's family, it was justice, though the kind that comes too late and always feels incomplete. For Missy Munday, the verdict was not an ending. It was barely a beginning. Tried as a juvenile for her role in the robbery, she was sentenced to time at the Oakland County Children's Village. She was also, by this point, a mother, having given birth to Strickland's son during their time on the run. A child raising a child, carrying the weight of choices she had been manipulated into making before she was old enough to fully understand them. When she was released at 19, she walked back into a world that had moved on without her. And here is where I want you to pause and feel something. Not judgment, but empathy. Because Missy Munday was not a criminal who happened to be young. She was a child who was targeted, groomed, and exploited by an adult who should have known better, who did know better, and chose to do it anyway. Whatever mistakes were made, they were made by a 15-year-old girl who was made to feel loved by someone who was using her. After her release, Missy faded quietly from public view. Whether she found peace, rebuilt her life, reconnected with her family, or continued to carry the scars of everything she had been through, we simply don't know. But I choose to believe she found her way. Because if this story has taught us anything, it's that survival, real survival, is possible, even after the worst has happened. The case of Missy Munday is many things at once. It is a story about the terrifying vulnerability of young people and how easily that vulnerability can be exploited by those who know exactly what they are doing. It is a story about a man named Elmer DeBoer who deserved to grow old and didn't. It is a story about the unexpected power of community, of millions of ordinary people watching a television screen and choosing to pick up the phone. And it is, perhaps most of all, a story about a girl who was failed by the adults around her, swallowed by circumstances she never fully controlled, and who still, somehow, found a way to tell the truth when it mattered most. Jerry Strickland stole years from Missy Munday that she will never get back. But he did not get to write the end of her story. And neither does this video. Wherever Missy is today, I hope she is okay. I genuinely do. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Cases like this one remind us why it matters to pay attention to the people around us, to the warning signs we sometimes choose to ignore, and to the quiet stories of survival that never quite make the headlines. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because sometimes, just like with Unsolved Mysteries, the more people who see a story, the more it matters.